there are times in history when you can certainly see that someone's having some fun. And in the turn of the 20th century, the Royal Navy is certainly one of those things having fun. And so we are starting off with the adventure class. Theoretically, the starting point of the scout cruisers. Theoretically, he says. Because you have to remember, in the 1900s, in fact, for much of the first 20 years of the 20th century, the Royal Navy has a large enough throughput of design, construction, refurbishment work, and refit work to not only keep the British yards happy, but to make the modern Royal Navy collapse with just wonderment of it. The current US Navy probably start crying because it's the stuff dreams are made of. And the modern Chinese Navy is something to aim for. Why? Because it's a time of transition, but also because the Royal Navy is very canny at managing its politics and managing its procurement. At this time, they are blessed to have a run of officers who are innovative, of naval constructors who are manipulative, good at their jobs, but manipulative, and First Lords. I'm talking of the, First Lords as in, not Sea Lords, the First Lords of the Admiralty, the ministers, who were trenchant, redoubtable, and remarkably versatile in the political dark arts. This means whilst there is always pressure on the naval budget, there's always people wanting to spend the money on other things, the Navy pretty much gets what it wants, when it wants, how it wants it, within a certain degree of latitude. Basically, the politicians would go, you can't have it today, okay? You can have it tomorrow. All right. Tomorrow's in the next day, right? Not tomorrow as in never. Yes. I mean, we'll be waiting at the stroke of midnight. We'll be there. It'll be there. It's not like today where you often see armed forces are forced to cut current capabilities on the promise of jam tomorrow, and the jam never comes. It was a case of we will wait for the jam, and then we will cut. When the jam arrives, that's when the cut happens. And until that jam arrives, you're paying the bill. It was a different world. It was a more colourful world, but also a scarier one. Which is why I worry when people say, oh, we're returning to that period. Do you really want to go back to that period? You really want to go back? The interwar years are one thing. You can think you're going back there and you're dealing with dictatorships, and that's on us in the 1920s and 1930s. Okay. That's scary. But in a way, that's more predictable. There is the League of Nations. There are various other things going around that time that do allow you some measure of control and management. But if you're really going back, and you think we're really going back to a multipolar, what is mine and what I can take is mine also world, well, they might use frothier language when they're doing it, but you're talking about the 1890s and 1900s. That's what you're really talking about. Now, one of the big creations of the 1890s and in the 1880s is the torpedo boat. And after the torpedo boat comes the torpedo boat destroyer. However, in a repeat, which will be heard again in a refrain which will be heard again in the 1920s and 1930s, the RN starts to get worried about their destroyer flotillas. They felt they would be awfully exposed in any battle. Where have I heard this before? Oh yes, Trapper-class destroyers and Didos, class cruisers. So developed between 1901 and 1902, the Admiralty developed a concept. These would be ships that would work with the destroyer flotillas, leading their torpedo attacks and backing them up when they are attacked by other destroyers. In simple terms, these would be, and I've actually seen the memo of this written as this, torpedo boat destroyer destroyers. You've got to love bureaucracy. You have got to love it, because if you don't, you will cry about it. I can't remember which memo I saw this in, but I remember looking at it and blinking and just going, I've got it somewhere, I stored it out. I take photos in the archives when I'm going through the archives of the documents, and I store them in folders on hard drives, so I have them somewhere, but you gotta love it. For some reason, the Royal Navy didn't like the acronym TBDD. I don't know why they didn't like TBDD. I don't understand. TBDD seems perfectly fine to me. But they didn't. So they went with scout cruisers instead. And this is the point at which the Royal Navy gets really, really naughty. Because they build 15 of these vessels overall, right? But I'm going to explain the story as we're getting into competition. And we're going to go through all these classes this year, so it's going to be some fun. In May 1902, it requested tenders for a design capable of at least 25 knots, have a protected deck, a range of at least 2,000 nautical miles, an armament of at least 6 quick-firing 12-pounder guns, that's 3-inch or 76 millimeters, then depending on your version of new money. 8 quick-firing 3-pounder, 47 millimeter guns, and 2 18-inch, that's 457 millimeter torpedo tubes. It's amazing. The Admiralty gets dozens of submissions. And they decide, oh, it's such a hard job. They make it known that they will be looking at ordering somewhere in the region of 3 to 4 dozen of these cruisers. Informally, but they make it known. So everyone's keen on getting this order because it's going to be a big order. What the Royal Navy does is they end up ordering 8 from 4 of the contractors. There is the Adventure class, ordered from Armstrong Whitworth, who are today's topic of discussion. There is the Forward class, ordered from Fairfield Shipbuilding and Engineering Company, Govan. They're very good builders, and that's a very good design, unsurprisingly. There was the Pathfinder class, ordered from Camel Lairds. And there was the Sentinel class, ordered from Vickers in Barrow-on-Furness. Now, that all sounds fairly normal. They've ordered 4 ships, and they've ordered 4 classes, each of 2 ships. There's nothing wrong with this. That's fine. Now, what you have to consider is what the Royal Navy then does next. They evaluate these designs. They love them. They enjoy them. They've ordered 8, 2 from each one of these ships. I told you they build 15 overall, right? The next 7 all come from Pembroke Royal Dockyard. The Royal Navy build them themselves. So, they get 4 companies to produce the best ships they can build. They can take a pair from each of them. They synthesize it. They sign very careful agreements which say they cannot share the information they gain with another commercial company. Everyone's happy. Pembroke Dockyard, of course, isn't a commercial company. and they build their own. There are many things in this world which are fun. There are some things which can seem fun in a mildly malevolent fashion. But you have to love a scenario where not only does the Royal Navy not order the dozens of ships they were talking about, but they don't even return to any of the builders to build the next classes of ships. They build them themselves. Because they can. Because they have their own yard. Of course, the real money comes in a town class cruisers, which the Royal Navy just churns out. And thanks again to the scout design, which is what then evolves into the light cruisers, which are town class, they know which builders they trust with and they go with it. So it serves them in 3 or 4 different ways. It's a good competition. I find it a lot of fun that the Royal Navy pretty much managed to get away with this without any trouble and any complaints. There was no lawsuits. There was no one upset. Well, there were a lot of people mildly miffed, but they got on with it. The Royal Navy was the biggest and best game in town, and the Royal Navy set the rules, and the Royal Navy marked its own homework. No one wanted to play that game. Not if they upset the umpire. So they rolled with it. There are advantages to being the biggest game in town. So let's consider the design for these ones. These vessels are the adventure class, and well, what can I say? Armstrong Worth outdo themselves to an extent. They build them at the Ellswick Time and Weir. They are roughly 2,713 tons, roughly. 2,713 tons. It's cool. That's a good weight to be, really. One can argue. And they are 114 meters long, thereabouts. About as accurate as you're going to get at this point. Beam, 11.7 meters. Draft, 3.8 meters. And their power comes from 12 Yarrow boilers, which, thanks to 2 triple expansion steam engines, supply 2 shafts with 16,000 indicated horsepower. They required a crew of 289. They had a top speed of 25 knots, which meant they hit the target. They had a range of 2,370 nautical miles at 10 knots, which means they hit the target. They had an armament of 10 quick-firing 12-pounder guns. Out of the ballpark for the target. 8 quick-firing 3-pounder guns. Useful. 2 18-inch torpedo tubes. We're happy with that. Then they had armor. Okay, so we all heard that thing which said an armored deck, right? Because what they have is a waterline belt of 2 inches. Okay, I suppose it's better than nothing. And a deck of 0.75 to 2 inches. So between 19 and 51 millimeters. Or roughly as thick as a tube of sweets. And a conning tower. They had a conning tower, and that had 3 inches of armor on it. Again, I'm never quite sure what 3 inches of armor is supposed to do, because if you're engaging something which has 76mm guns, the odds are you're engaging it at ranges at which the 3-inch armor is not going to have much of an impact. They're not exactly standoff weapons, and this is not exactly a time when torpedo boat destroyers and torpedo boats and torpedo boat destroyers, aka scout cruisers, are going to be standing off at range. They're going to be getting in close in a nasty little melee. In which case, you're either going to be hit from close range, in which case it's going to punch through, or you're not. I can understand the conning tower on vessels which have an engagement at range scenario. But the smaller your ship gets, the more and more close in the action gets. And this is, of course, before we start considering the whole reality that if you're the commander of this destroyer, well, this cruiser, but let's be honest, the difference between it and the destroyer is not that great, and you're fighting that kind of melee action, are you going to be going, you know what, I'm going to do this from the conning tower where I can barely see out and I can barely see anything, or am I going to be doing it from the exposed bridge, trying to actually see what was going on so I can judge and, give orders and see everything with the eyes which are my best sensors, the Mark 1 eyeball? In which case, that's weight which could be used for other things. Perhaps it could have been smeared over the deck to give it a slightly thicker deck armor. Just a tad. Just a little smear. Not asking for much, just a smear. Maybe get it up from I don't know, this to an inch. From that to that. Anyway, of course, these ones were built by Armstrong Whitworth, and I'm trying to keep my notes nice and easily visible. I'm also trying to be good and not print my notes out so I don't just post them straight up next to the camera. So if my eyes do wander, that's because I am checking that I'm reading from my notes correctly. They're a bullet history of them. They're founded in 1847 by the engineer William George Armstrong. He technically founds the Elswick Works at Newcastle. They're to produce hydraulic machinery, cranes, bridges, soon artillery, including, of course, the Armstrong breech-loading gun and various other things. Now, at various points, they go through a lot of mergers. They do quite well. The Elswick Ordnance Company, for example, comes about because in 1859, William Armstrong had to separate the armaments business from his other interests in order to avoid a conflict of interest, as he had been made the engineer of rifled ordnance for the War Office. And, of course, the Armstrongs' main customer was the British government. It's amazing. In 1859, someone had this level of decency. Basically said, okay, I will hold no financial interest in this company, which is going to be supplying the government, until 1864, when he leaves the government service. And then it's reunited with the main Armstrong businesses. So, 5 years. It technically survives without him. Yeah, we can all be as we can all scream it's as sus as anything, but I'll leave that to one side. They're credited with building a hydroelectric station at Deer Lake and all sorts of things. In Newfoundland. They helped with the construction of the Panama Canal. They did all sorts of things around the world. They built railways, they built ships, they built. This company is colossal. And you have to understand that in 1904, it is about as big as they come. This is a company which will be building battleships quite soon, battle cruisers. This, of course, ship up there is HMS Malaya, Queen Elizabeth class battleship with 15-inch guns. Not exactly something you give to a small or an incapable company. Armstrong Whitworth is as big as they get. It really is. So if they are competing for a contract, that's a big deal. They're going to put good stuff forward. How do I put this politely? There are 3 major shipbuilding yards in the UK at this point. 4 if you count Harland and Wolff. Camel Laird's, Vickers and Armstrong. There are another 6 yards which are on the rung just below there, where mainly their limitations are their size, and they're expanding dramatically. This is what it's like to be the Royal Navy in 1900s. It's not an embarrassment of riches. It's the equivalent of Tinder, but with shipyards. And the Royal Navy is... Oh God, this is not a good one for me, but I will explain it. The Royal Navy is the billionaire astronaut philanthropist whose every single picture is of rippling 6-pack holding a cute puppy whilst reading either, a science journal or... This is the point I'm getting. Basically, it's The Bachelor and the Royal Navy. Instead of it being one of those episodes, those versions which occasionally my cousins seem to watch, where The Bachelor turns out to not be what they are. The Bachelor really is what they're all built up to be and more. And all the shipyards are going around going, please let us build your ships. This is what the Royal Navy has. And the thing is, the choice they're picking between are, just pick any name out the hat of your dreams, and that's pretty much the equivalent of what they're picking. That is the only sort of frame of reference I can give it to the modern world, because the modern world has not developed like this. In many ways, we do not have capitalism as capitalism was sort of intended. The idea was that capital would work and would be invested, and that would create money coming back, and then money would be more invested, and that would grow, and companies would grow. We've got a version of capitalism which is obsessed with the stock market perceived value. At the time, it was obsessed with the real value and the quality of the product, not the quality of the marketing. And that suggests we've become shallow, but we haven't. We've become more consumer orientated. And the thing is, the consumers were, how do I put it? It was a smaller consumer population. It was a higher level of information available for individual consumers, and that has an impact on the form of capitalism you have. And I'm not getting into that in massive detail because that's an economist's job, not mine. Okay, I know enough to understand what I don't know, and to understand enough around the context of what I'm talking about. the point is, they have a very cutthroat. Companies fail regularly, but they also have large enough markets that multiple companies are being kept going. In many ways, the shipbuilding market is far more like. You can't really say the car or computer market because, honestly, most these days they come down to, once you look at the roots of about three manufacturers. There's two options. There's a duopoly for processing units. There's a duopoly for roughly a duopoly for engine manufacturers for cars. There are other manufacturers, but they don't produce that many engines. Once you start looking at it, it becomes a very different system. Whereas in this case, if you were talking in 1904 and Armstrong Whitworth wanted to build something, and they were looking at it, and someone was going to them, "Oh yeah, well, you could build your own engines, but how about you join with everyone else and just buy our engines?" Armstrong would look at them and go, "How much do you want to spend?" "No, we'll build them ourselves. We'll build it ourselves. It'll be done. Bye bye." So, I mean, this is a very abridged list. There are very few companies I would put next to them built the modern world. Armstrong Whitworth is one of them. When they merge with Vickers and become Armstrong Vickers, that's a scary organization. I mean, there are arms manufacturers these days who have. There is no arms manufacturer these days who have achieved that level of diversity and that level of complete domination of their of their market. There are companies which are far larger these days, etc., because of the way the market's expanded and all the things that we're talking about. But in terms of relative to then, Armstrong Whitworth and Armstrong Vickers, when they were formed, because they were both two massive companies which already were pretty much offering the complete set. Oh, you need this. Oh, we have that down there. Oh, you need that. We have that down there. Oh, you need that, and we're up there. That, frankly, modern conglomerates eat your heart out. Anyway, HMS Adventure. What? She gets up to a lot. She's laid down in 1904. She's launched in September 1904. So January to September is how long it takes to basically build her. And she's commissioned in October 1905 after trials and testings. She's finally decommissioned in August 1919, so she serves the whole way through the First World War. She's built at the Ellswick shipyard, and her original name was going to be Eddystone, but this was changed before construction began. The ship, immediately upon completion, was put into reserve status. Why? The Royal Navy didn't need her. But they wanted her, but they didn't need her right that moment. Not long after completion, 2 additional 12-pounder guns were added, and the 3-pounder guns were replaced with 6 quick-firing 6-pounder Hotchkiss guns. In April of that year of completion, she collided with and sank a sailing boat off the coast of Sussex coast. And in June, she was commissioned as the leader of 1907. This is in June of 1907. She was commissioned as the leader of the first torpedo boat destroyer flotilla. Status. And 3 years later, she's in for refit at Chatham Royal Dockyard. Then becomes flotilla leader for the second destroyer flotilla, based at Devonport. Undergoes another refit in August 1912, after which time her main guns were replaced by 9 4-inch its 102mm guns. And then she joins the 3rd Light Cruiser Squadron for the 1913 fleet maneuvers. In July 1913, she joins the 6th Destroyer Flotilla, based at Dover. You can guess where this is going. In May 1915, she joined the 6th Light Cruiser Squadron at Humber to patrol against Zeppelins. And in July that year, she became the flagship at Queenston until November 1917. On Boxing Day in 1915, she was distinguished by her crew and her rescuing the crew of the stricken steamship Heronium. She escorted convoys to Gibraltar during the last summer of the war, and then served the Mediterranean, and in 1919 the Aegean. She returned to Ingham Docks to be paid off in August 1919. During that time, her bad luck included a collision with a trawler in January 1920. And she was eventually towed for scrap in 1920 by HMS Skirmisher, a fellow scout cruiser, being dropped off in Morecambe. This is an active career. She is a member of the Harwich Patrol, and she's a member of the Harwich Force Dover Patrol. She works under Rear Admiral Bacon. She does all sorts of duties in her service in World War One. She's a very useful little ship. And she's procured as part of a con, let's be honest. I love that about them. I just do. Right, HMS Attentive, sometimes forgotten a little bit more than her sister, has a slightly interesting career. So, as we know, technically, they're supposed to be ordered separately, but Attentive ends up getting laid down in January 1904. She gets her complete... she's launched in November 1904 and is completed in October 1905. Now, again, she's placed in pretty much reserve straight after completion. The Royal Navy don't need them immediately. And again, goes through a similar gun fit or refit change as her sister. She's commissioned in March 1907 for service in the Nord Division of the Home Fleet. On 7th August 1907, there is a slight disagreement as well when it will happen, but we think it's probably the 7th of August. She collided with the destroyer HMS Quail. This, unsurprisingly, damaged Quail's bow. There again, they did call the destroyer HMS Quail. The following year, in 1908, Attentive was involved in a series of accidents during a live firing exercise at night with the Eastern Destroyer Flotilla, accidentally ramming and sinking the destroyer Gala, killing one crewman. The Attentive then collided with the destroyer Ribble, holding her hull. Now you might notice there's a small thing going on here. They are crashing into other ships. I have in videos in the past explained that the Royal Navy in the interwar years tries to keep the Royal Navy's warfighting spirit alive by allowing the destroyers basically to encourage the destroyers to play as risky as possible and go as close to warfighting as possible in terms of exercising and training so that they keep their warfighting edge, and this allows the cruisers to concentrate on doing their duties of cruising, their peacetime duties of presence and diplomacy, and reminding people not to go to war with the British. In the 1900s, the Royal Navy is not stupid. None of the navies in the world are stupid. and they know that they have been playing the diplomacy game and the presence game for a long time. So they have a lot of exercises going on with a lot of destroyers and these vessels being used in close quarters, doing high-risk maneuvers, training them, trying to get a war-fighting edge. This is, to an extent, where the Harwich Force and the Dover Patrol successes will come from. These are not without risks. Saying that, you do start to realize quite quickly that the Scout class cruiser has an issue. You are that much bigger than the destroyers you're protecting, but you don't really have that much advantage over them. This is the point at which the Town class cruisers come into service. Because the Town class cruisers have the same maneuverability pretty much as the Scout class cruisers, despite them being light cruisers. They have the same speed, but they are just that bit bigger, just that bit more stable, and it makes it a real problem for the Royal Navy, because the Scout class cruisers, they've been trying to go for a cruiser as close to a destroyer as they could get. And the trouble was, it couldn't balance either. By just going just that much further into the cruiser realm, as they do with the Town class, you end up with an excellent ship. Scout classes aren't bad. They're good ships. But they are at one of those spots in ship design at the time, and this changes on due to technologies and various availabilities period, but there's always, just as there's a sweet spot in designs, and there's a sweet spot in ship design of a roughly 10,000 tons and a sweet spot of roughly 20,000 tons. We know these sweet spots, they not exist, but usually if you're using those two figures, you can usually produce a decent ship for pretty much any job that you want to do, unless it's going against peers which are massively bigger than each other. No, bigger than it. Without numbers on the side. However, just as there are sweet spots, there are nadir spots. Spots which, they always come with issues. They are always balancing acts. And 2,500 to 3,000 tons is one of those things in this period. You will either get a very good ship, you will either get a very bad ship, or you will get a ship which is after repairs in Chatham, she becomes leader of the 3rd Destroyer Flotilla, then joins the 2nd Destroyer Flotilla in 1910. So 1909, 3rd Destroyer Flotilla, then 2nd Destroyer Flotilla. About between 1911 and 1912, she has the same gun upgrade again as Adventure, losing gaining 9 4-inch guns, 4 guns on each broadside, and the remaining gun placed on the quarterdeck. After refit in August 1912 at Devonport, she is assigned to the 3rd Light Cruiser Squadron for the annual manoeuvres, and then goes to the 9th Destroyer Flotilla at Portsmouth. She joins the 6th Destroyer Flotilla at Dover later that year, joining up with sister. During the Curragh incident of 1914, the ship was deployed to Ireland with HMS Pathfinder, and Winston Churchill threatened using those ships to pour enough shot and shell into Belfast to reduce it to ruins if the Ulster Volunteers revolted against the British Armed Forces. I'm not quite sure whether I think Pathfinder and Attentive would have been enough to do that, but I'm fairly sure there were a few other vessels able to be sent if they needed to. But good old Winston Churchill, always there with the invective. She spent most of the First World War as part of the Dover Patrol, but in 1915 she actually became an early victim of air power. While supporting a naval bombardment of positions in Ostend, Attentive was bombed, suffering 8 casualties. This attack forced the squadron to briefly disperse before returning to carry on the bombardment. And, Attentive didn't require that much work to fix. She screened the raiding force during the Zeebrugge raid in 1918 and recovered part of the ship's crew of the concrete-filled cruiser Sirius after she detonated her demolition charges. She then joined her sister in escorting convoys to Gibraltar. Spent a few months off Mansk, which must not have been fun because she's not exactly a warship, supporting British forces invading the Russian Civil War. Paid off in 1918 and skulls were scrapped in 1920. She's a good little ship. Summary. Oh, I like these ships. I do like the Adventure class. I like the story about them, but I also like the fact that they are pretty much jumped up destroyers. That's what they are. And they show the value of a name. You see, we get hung up on the names these days. It's one of the things why bilge pumps came up started saying we should revert to the rating system. Because we've got obsessed with the names over the roles. The cruising role, as I have explained in several videos and will be explaining for the entire year, has existed for a long time before cruisers existed, and still exists now, and ships still have to do the cruising role. The destroyer role is one of the first new roles to evolve. And even that can be said to be not that new, as many ships had carried anti-boat guns, and boat guns for their own boats to deal with small boats and boat attacks. But the fact is, you have the torpedo boat appear because of the torpedo. Again, light attack craft, they're nothing really new. And they build torpedo boat destroyers, ships to destroy them. And they build torpedo boat destroyers. And they go, oh, TBDD, it's too big. So let's go scout cruisers. But it could have gone light cruiser. They could have. There are all sorts of names they could have. They could have gone for destroyer cruiser, or cruiser destroyer, or torpedo boat cruiser. That would have been fun. TBC, to be confirmed. But they went with scout cruiser. And at this point, most people sit down and go, well, they must have been for scouting. These must have been about reconnaissance. And they are. They are, because the Royal Navy is starting to think in 1900 about fighting a worldwide war. And what the realities of fighting a worldwide war mean. Because if you're fighting a worldwide war, what will be useful in one theatre might be absolutely terrible in another. The ships I need to fight a war in the Pacific are not the ships I need to fight a war in the Atlantic, are not the ships I need to fight a war in the North Sea. I'm going to have to accept compromises. I'm going to have 70% solutions. But there are also some areas where I'm going to need specific capabilities. Ideal class, specific capability. Mine lane cruiser, it's a specific capability. Scout cruisers, they are a specific capability. Is the Royal Navy likely to be conducting destroyer sweeps in the Far East? No. Are they likely to be conducting destroyer sweeps in the North Atlantic? Well, I'd hope not in the destroyers they have at the time. The places where they'll be conducting destroyer sweeps, if they're actually conducting destroyer sweeps, are going to be the North Sea, the English Channel, the Mediterranean, and potentially the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Potentially. If they're conducting destroyer sweeps, that's where they're going to be doing them. In those scenarios, those destroyers are going to be sweeping, looking for their targets. Having a couple of cruisers, well, ships were called cruisers, but remember, they're really TBDDs, as the reconnaissance assets, as the leader of the flotilla leader, the command ship, and another one, maybe two, attached to the flotilla so they can scout ahead. It's useful. Something which can spot the enemy and survive long enough to tell you where they are, so you can conduct a proper attack. That's their requirement. To be able to dodge and survive long enough to tell you where the enemy are. Then send in the horde of destroyers. They're good little ships. They also have something special which comes off them. The Baha'i class. And I love the design for Baha'i class. Baha'i class have a displacement of 3,100 tons. Ooh. Something's gone up here. They have Parsons steam turbines supplied by 10 Yarrow boilers. They can carry a maximum amount of 650 tons of coal. Normally they'd carry 150, but they could carry 650 if they wanted. They had a top speed they were designed for of 26.5 knots. They achieved 27 knots in trial and 25 knots when they were fully loaded with coal and all their other stuff. They had an endurance of 1,400 nautical miles at 23.5 knots, 3,500 nautical miles at 10 knots. It's amazing what a few hundred extra tons to get you up to 3,100 tons does. They had a deck of 19 millimeters armor plating. They had no belt, according to this list. And they have a conning tower of 76 mil. They carried 10 120mm, that's 4.7-inch guns, 50 caliber, 6 47mm, and 2 18-inch torpedo tubes. The design was borrowed from the Adventure class. They comprised the Bahia and the Rio Grande do Sul, and the third ship was cancelled on the class, so they only built 2. They were the fastest cruisers in the world when commissioned. They were modernized in the 1920s and served until 1948. They're built between 1907 and 1910. And they are as much a part of the dreadnought, the South American dreadnought race, as the dreadnoughts are, because there is no point in having super sexy dreadnoughts if you don't have something to look after them. So they were ordered as part of the 1904 building program by Brazil, which had 2 Minas Gerais dreadnoughts, 10 para-class destroyers, 3 submarines, a submarine tender, and theoretically the 3 Baha'i class. The Highest Keel lay down in 1907 at Newcastle upon Tyne, Ellswick in the Ellswick Yard, and she was laid on the 19th of August, Rio Grande do Sul, 30th of August. They were gorgeous ships. They were powerful ships. But you can see in just this one sweep what the really big difference is. Turbines versus triple expansion. Turbines, 2 stacks, because of the arrangement of the engines. Triple expansion, quadruple stacks, 25 knots. 26.5 knots, let's say, but 27 knots on trial, which is good. 2 knots faster, 2 stacks less. So that's a lot more deck space, and that's a lot more efficient hull design. And really, that's something you have to consider about with the engineering of this period, the hull design of the cruisers going up. What are these cruisers built to do? They are built to give Brazil presence. They don't want to rush over their dreadnoughts. That's worrying. There is a dictum at various points in naval warfare where it's worthwhile turning up with the whole fleet if you're a small navy, or none of the fleet. I've written them onto your whole force, in which case they're probably safe unless you're dealing with a far larger foe of being annihilated, or it requires none of your force. This is what I would call a lower ranking medium powers fudge on that. It's either worthwhile showing up with your whole force, or none of your force, or have some special ships which show up on their own, which have enough speed and enough firepower to get themselves out of trouble if they're in trouble, and tell the full fleet they're needed. That is what the Bahia class are. This is what scout cruisers are, light cruisers are. They're enough of a presence that 99 times out of 100 they're enough to do the job. And go, really? You pull me all this way for this? And when they're not, they're usually enough of a firepower they can get themselves out of trouble and get away. It's a tough balance act. But these were about the sweet spot for the time. These days, an equivalent sweet spot is probably around about the 8,000 ton mark. Have enough firepower to get yourself out of trouble. Enough presence to deal with 90% of the problems. What do we call it though these days? Not a cruiser. Anyway, that is the adventure class. Please note, next week it's the London class. There are all sorts of class of cruisers coming, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Hope you're enjoying it so far. I myself am especially looking forward to getting to the Amiral Maragescu of the Armenian Navy, because I just think that'd be cool. So, what have we got coming up in terms of lives? Well, when I record this video, I have no idea what the selections are going to be for the patron votes. So I haven't put them in. Cruise Ship 68, of course, coming up, but there is the Battle of Dew coming soon, and then Lord Charles Berethard. And you notice I'm announcing April, but I'm being kind of cagey about March. And I'm being kind of cagey about March because, and I say this with the full love in my heart, at some point in March, I'm going to disappear for a weekend. That weekend, I am going to a Hen Do as the man of honor. Now, I'm organizing this weekend, and I am trying to organize it so I avoid the spa. But we have